If you or someone you love lives with food allergies or celiac, I know that you've heard someone say something like, a little anxiety is good for you. It keeps you safe. If you have found my podcast, I'm guessing that you have also noticed that anxiety feels heavy to carry and that it might be interfering with what you want your life to look like. In this episode, we're going to talk about what anxiety actually is, what it doesn't do, and where is the line between protective awareness or appropriate caution and the chronic stress and anxiety or trauma that wear down your nervous system or keep it in fight or flight. We'll unpack the language we use around allergy anxiety, how trauma often gets mislabeled and misunderstood or completely ignored, and why so many families feel trapped between being told that they're too anxious and being warned that if they're not anxious, they're not safe. This isn't an episode about getting rid of anxiety. It's not about shaming anxiety. And it's not about minimizing risk or being careless. It's about understanding what helps people make good decisions over time and what undermines our confidence, our clarity, and our quality of life. It's about separating fear from competence and urgency from effectiveness. And it's about creating space for choices that are regulated and sustainable in the long term without harming your physical, mental, social, or emotional health, especially in a world where food allergy management already asks so much of us. Welcome to the Don't Feed the Fear podcast, where we dive into the complex world of food allergy anxiety. I'm your host, Dr. Amanda Whitehouse, food allergy anxiety psychologist and food allergy mom. Whether you're dealing with allergies yourself or supporting someone who is, join us for an empathetic and informative journey toward food allergy calm and confidence. You're not alone if you've ever wondered whether the anxiety you carry is protecting you or just exhausting you. So thanks for joining me to talk about it today. I hear this all the time with the clients that I work with. I need my anxiety. It's keeping me safe. And I hear other professionals and my colleagues who have every great intention of helping their clients and helping the community say things like, a little anxiety is good for you. Or anxiety is your friend. It keeps you safe when you have food allergies or celiac. I understand the intent, and I want to respectfully challenge everyone to be mindful and careful about the language that we use and to be precise with it, because I think that this message is harmful. I do not believe that we need a little anxiety to manage our food allergies responsibly. It's going to show up. We can normalize it and accept it, but I don't want us to prescribe it to our clients or to our children and make them feel like they need to cling to it in order to stay safe. So let's start with the language. One of the biggest issues that I see clinically, but also in the generalized community, and especially on social media, is that we use certain words interchangeably when they actually describe very different physiological and psychological states. In particular, we tend to blur together stress, overwhelm, anxiety, and trauma. While they can overlap and while they can exist at the same time, they're not the same thing. And treating them as if they are can quietly reinforce the nervous system dysregulation, chronic stress that many of us experience. So before we go any further, I think it's important to define these terms to be accurate. Stress is a physiological and psychological response to demand. It's what happens when something requires effort, attention, or adaptation. Stress is not inherently bad. It can be acute or chronic. It can be mild or intense, but stress tells us that something needs my energy. Overwhelm is what happens when demands exceed our current capacity, whether that is emotional, cognitive, physical, or logistical. Overwhelm often involves stress, but it specifically reflects a mismatch between what's being asked of us and the resources that we have available in that moment to meet the need. So think of stress as a demand and overwhelm as not being well-resourced enough in that moment to meet the demand. Anxiety is very different. It is a state of anticipatory threat. Anxiety involves worry and physiological activation that is oriented toward what might happen. It is future-focused, and it's driven by the nervous system's threat detection system, what we often call fight or flight. We can experience anxiety symptoms, and sometimes people meet the criteria for a diagnosable anxiety disorder. Trauma is not the same thing as anxiety. Trauma is not worrying about and anticipating what might happen. Trauma is not defined by the event itself, but by the nervous system's response to it. So trauma occurs when an experience overwhelms our capacity to cope, where we are harmed or experience the threat of harm, whether that's accurate or not. We can be traumatized by a perceived danger or harm that didn't actually happen to us. Trauma can be a single incident, or it can be cumulative. And unfortunately, food allergy management can involve both of those things. We often refer to them as big T trauma and little t trauma. The big T being big isolated incidents of significant harm or trauma. And little t trauma being smaller but chronic, more consistent over time experiences of trauma. You hear people talk about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a very real threat and possibility when you live with food allergies and celiac. You'll also hear people talk about CPTSD, which is chronic PTSD. So that's a lot of information for you to process if you're not in my field, but thank you for letting me make those distinctions. So since we're trying to focus on the concept today of do we need our anxiety, let's go back to that one. What keeps us safe when we have food allergies or celiac is not the anxiety. It's the knowledge, the preparation, awareness, discernment, and appropriate caution. Caution is not anxiety. Caution is thoughtful. Caution is informed. And caution lives in the part of the brain that can accurately assess risk, plan ahead, and make decisions based on facts, not fear. Anxiety is what happens when we go beyond that, when the nervous system shifts into fight or flight mode because it believes that danger is imminent and uncontrollable. And those are very different states to operate from. The same behaviors that look exactly the same on the outside can come from an appropriate sense of caution, or they can come from a place of anxiety within. So it's important to understand what is happening in our brains and our bodies. When we're regulated, when our nervous systems feel reasonably safe, we have access to the part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex. That's the part of our brain responsible for logic, planning, decision-making, perspective, flexible problem solving. It's our higher order thinking. When we're in a relatively safe state, that part of our brain allows us to read ingredient labels carefully. That's where we calmly explain our allergies to someone who needs to understand, who might be serving or cooking us food. That's the part of the brain that helps us logically and in an organized manner plan ahead for a school event or a work function or traveling. When we move into fight or flight, which is the state where anxiety lives, the access to the brain is reduced. That prefrontal cortex literally gets less blood flow. The nervous system prioritizes survival over the nuances of that careful and intelligent decision making. Our assessment of threat becomes distorted and inaccurate. Our decision making becomes more rigid. We're more likely to catastrophize or focus on the worst case scenario. We're very likely to miss important information, particularly information that's telling us that we're safe, because we're focused on scanning the environment for danger and identifying threats. We are more likely to overreact or sometimes to underreact. So when we're in fight or flight, we might be reading the labels, but we're reading them over and over again. We all know the feeling of when we shift into fight or flight when we're trying to explain our allergies, and it comes out differently. It doesn't help us have a more effective conversation. That's the difference between caution and anxiety. This is not a personal failing. This is how our biology works. This is why the idea that we need anxiety to stay safe doesn't really hold up neurobiologically. We're at our safest when we can think clearly, and anxiety compromises that. Anxiety is a terrible decision-making tool. It's not a good filter for making choices. When we're anxious, our thinking narrows. We become more black and white. Our thinking is urgent and reactive. It's not comprehensive. We might start looking for certainty where certainty doesn't exist, or we might outsource our trust to the loudest voice we hear. And to get really circular about this, I would argue that it's our anxiety that says we need our anxiety to keep us safe. If I'm not anxious, I won't be careful enough. Motivation is less effective when it is fear-based. Anxiety creates urgency, but urgency is not the same thing as accuracy and effectiveness. Systems built on urgency burn people out. And you hear it enough in this space, how the chronic stress, especially for those of us who are already prone to immune issues, allergic diseases, we might be more prone to developing autoimmune issues or other chronic illnesses over time. I'm not saying that if you're anxious, it means you're doing something wrong. But what I'm saying is that accepting anxiety as something that happens is very different from telling ourselves or our children that we need it. When we say we need anxiety, we unintentionally reinforce the belief that calm equals danger, that regulation equals complacency, and that safety only exists when we're really vigilant. Those messages keep nervous systems stuck. Chronic anxiety impairs executive functioning, which is your higher order thinking skills. Heightened threat states reduce our cognitive flexibility, and regulated nervous systems support better decision making. Food allergy specific research has shown that elevated parental anxiety is associated with reduced quality of life. And there isn't really any clear evidence that higher anxiety improves safety outcomes. Anxiety is not a mechanism of protection. Unfortunately, chronic anxiety can be harmful. So instead of saying we need anxiety to stay safe, what if we said we need knowledge, preparation, awareness? We need more support when anxiety shows up. We need systems and a society in which there is room for us to participate safely. Instead of saying befriend your anxiety, what if we said learn to listen to your body without letting fear drive the bus? It's not about eliminating anxiety or resisting it or condemning it. It's about not organizing our entire safety system around it. I want to make time and space in the future to talk more here on the podcast and on social media about the difference between trauma and anxiety, because I think a mistake that many of us are also making is calling our trauma anxiety. Trauma and anxiety sound the same to many people, understandably, and sometimes they can feel the same, but they're not the same thing. When someone has experienced a severe allergic reaction or had a very close call or perceived that they were experiencing anaphylaxis, even if they weren't, the nervous system encodes that experience as a survival event. Obviously, rightfully so. Food allergies are life-threatening, and we're accurate when we feel and perceive them in that way. The nervous system is designed to remember those moments very vividly so that it can try to prevent them from happening again. So later on, when someone finds themselves scanning every ingredient list, avoiding social situations, or feeling their heart race in restaurants or birthday parties, it's easy to label that as anxiety. You've heard people say often trauma lives in the body. It lives in the nervous system and the way our nervous system detects that threat. So when trauma is present, the nervous system can start to react not just to real danger, but to reminders of danger, or what we often call triggers. This is one of the most complex things about food allergy life. They're all around us. The trigger might just be food or a restaurant or the cafeteria or the epinephrine that we have to carry. Identifying the difference between anxiety and trauma matters because they impact people in different ways and they require different approaches for support. There's a lot of talk about cognitive work in food allergies. It can be very effective. And I have found in my work that a lot of people with food allergy anxiety don't respond to cognitive work alone. And probably that's because they don't just have anxiety about their food allergies. They've been traumatized. With anxiety, we would be more focused on working with the patterns of worry, the catastrophic thinking, or anticipatory fear about what might happen in the future. With trauma, it's really more crucial to address the nervous system and its response to what already happened in the past, not the future, but as though the past threat could return at any moment. Trauma responses tend to be more automatic. They're not as thought out. They're more physiological, and they're less responsive to logic alone. Someone might know intellectually that a situation is safe, but their body can still react with those symptoms that many of us know too well: racing heart, tight chest, nausea, a sudden urge to escape. That's not a failure of our rational thinking. That's the nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do after a survival event. Trauma isn't just about changing your thoughts. It's your whole physical experience and whether or not you feel safe in the world. If we're saying a little bit of anxiety is good for you, but we aren't really distinguishing between anxiety and trauma, we're telling people basically it's good for you to use the effects of that trauma to protect you moving forward. We're keeping people traumatized. So this isn't just about semantics. It's really about getting to the root of why so many of us feel so anxious, why a lot of that for so many of us is actually unresolved trauma, not anxiety. And how can we begin healing our nervous systems? We want to move the conversation away from blame and toward understanding. People who are already carrying trauma need support in updating the story of safety. They need support in learning that caution and fear are not the same thing. We cannot get out of it if we are prescribing it to one another and telling each other that we need it. Let's make it concrete by walking through a few everyday scenarios that a lot of families or individuals with food allergies or celiac might face. So, for each one, let's talk about what appropriate and protective caution might look like, and then contrast that or expand farther into the behaviors that I see with a lot of my clients when anxiety or trauma responses kick in and take over. Understanding the difference is what helps us to start to recognize and eventually shift when our nervous system has moved from a thoughtful space where we make our best decisions and into something more anxiety and fear driven. I talked briefly about reading labels earlier. So, protective caution here is very straightforward. It means reading ingredient labels carefully before eating a packaged food, especially if it's a new product or a brand that you haven't used before. It might mean double checking when packaging changes, looking for allergen statements, and making sure the product aligns with your individual risk tolerance. That is thoughtful, informed, and protective. Where anxiety sometimes begins to creep in is when the label gets read again and again and again. Not because any new information is being gathered, but because the nervous system is seeking reassurance. People often describe to me feeling like they can't trust what they're seeing, fear that they might have missed something, wanting confirmation from another family member to have them check it or confirm it. They might put the product down or avoid eating it and come back to it to read again later. None of those behaviors are adding new safety. The safety came from reading the label accurately the first time, maybe the second, sometimes even the third time. When I work with people who are struggling with this specifically, we make a rule and we try to limit to reading 3 times. So once at the store, once when we're unpacking the food or putting it in the pantry or the fridge at home, and then once more when we open it for the first time to eat it. All 3 of those times probably aren't necessary, but we compromise a little and try to make a clear boundary. This is a really good example of how anxiety is self-reinforcing. The way that our brains are wired actually makes it very easy for anxiety to build its own feedback loop. It feels good to read the label once and confirm that your allergens or gluten are not in that product. So if it feels good once, your anxiety drops a little bit. You get a moment of relief, and that relief teaches your brain something very powerful and simplistic. Checking helps. Check again, check more. It feels good. So the next time you encounter a new product or the next time you go to eat a food, your brain remembers that checking was a good strategy. It helped you to feel better. And you might want to check more times, maybe twice this time. Each time the anxiety rises and you respond by checking, more researching, more asking for reassurance, it builds on itself. The drop in distress is what psychologists call negative reinforcement. It doesn't mean that something bad happened. It just means that the behavior removed an uncomfortable feeling. And because of that, the brain learns to repeat it. Over time, the brain starts to associate safety not with the actual safety behavior, but the anxiety reducing ritual, the checking, the validation, or the confirmation. So instead of, I feel safe because I read the label carefully, the nervous system starts to believe I'm safe because I checked 5 times. And if that made me safe, checking 6 times is going to make me even safer. That's where anxiety can slowly start expanding its territory, generalizing to other situations, getting bigger than what it first started as. The behaviors designed to relieve the anxiety start happening more often in more situations with more urgency. The first careful check, or maybe the second careful check, was already enough. But the brain only remembers that that act made the discomfort go away. None of this means that checking labels or asking questions or planning ahead is bad. Those are the appropriate precautions. The difference is how they function in the moment. Are they being used once thoughtfully to gather information, or are they happening repeatedly and unnecessarily to soothe the nervous system that feels unsafe? That's one of the clues to recognizing when you've crossed the line from precaution into anxiety or fear. When behaviors are driven by anxiety, they tend to multiply without actually adding extra protection. The protective behavior, or the part that actually increases your safety, tends to be clear, specific, and purposeful. Anxiety and trauma responses tend to be repetitive, they feel urgent, and they lean toward avoidant, stepping away from situations, eliminating, escaping the distress. They can feel very compelling in the moment, but they don't increase safety. And over time, they reduce our confidence, our flexibility, our participation in life. None of this means we should judge ourselves when those patterns show up, but recognizing the difference can help us to build healthier patterns and to begin asking a more useful question. Not, am I anxious enough to be safe? But instead, is what I'm doing right now actually increasing safety, or is my nervous system asking for reassurance? That's a different conversation. So I know this is a lot to take in. I hope that something clicked. I always love to hear from you, but especially about this episode, I would love to hear your feedback about how this lands, what your perspective is on it, and what parts of it you want me to talk about more. If you're feeling relieved, uncomfortable, curious, motivated, validated, afraid, anxious, all of it makes sense. You don't have to resolve anything today. Just notice what it feels like to consider that safety might come from clarity rather than fear. Consider the idea that you could feel calmer and still be responsible. So as always, I want to give you 3 really gentle action steps today. Number 1, just start noticing your language. Try replacing any statement that sounds something like, anxiety keeps me safe, with, I need to be informed and prepared. Second, if you're shopping and you're reading labels, packing food for an outing or a trip, planning a conversation with a teacher, notice what state you're in. Are you calm and regulated? Or are you already anxious and thinking in that faster, more focused, more reactive way? The more attention you pay to it, the more it will naturally shift. And number 3, if this conversation resonated with you, I would invite you to listen to the guided meditation that I recorded to go along with this episode. I wrote it specifically to help you develop awareness about this and start to shift and recognize the difference between decisions that are made from anxiety and decisions that are made from a cautious awareness. You can find that as a bonus episode here on the podcast or under my teacher profile on Insight Timer. You are not reckless without anxiety. You are not unsafe without fear. You are thoughtful, capable, and allowed to seek safety in ways that don't cost you your peace or your long-term health and wellness. Thank you for listening. If you are finding my show helpful, it would mean so much to me if you would share it with someone else who might enjoy it, leave me a rating or a review, and help me continue to share what I think is a really important message with more people out there who need it. I will talk with you next week. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical or mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you have any questions about your own medical experience or mental health needs, please consult a professional. I'm Dr. Amanda Whitehouse. Thanks for joining me. And until we chat again, remember, don't feed the fear.